Let me just say a couple of words in advance. This is one of the series of events that the library organizes, Meet the Authors. And this is a great opportunity, we think, to engage the university community and others beyond the university in discussion and opportunities to find out about a whole range of aesthetic, creative, intellectual endeavors that are either located on campus or brought in from some of our distinguished speakers. We are very fortunate to have a distinguished local, indigenous speaker this evening, Bill Miles, and I've got a little more to say about him in a minute. But first, let me say a word of thanks to our sponsors this evening. This event sponsored by the Northeastern Bookstore, as well as the Institute for International Student and Scholar Institute at Northeastern, and we're grateful for that sponsorship. Let me thank the library's Programming and Communications Committee, who've done a lot of the legwork and groundwork to bring this event together this evening. And let me remind you not to leave one single piece of food uneaten by the end of the evening, because it's too good to waste. Okay, now, it's usual at this point for the introducer to bring to bear some of the research that he or she has done about the speaker in order to pave the way, so to speak. We asked Bill for some details of his biography, and he actually sent in an introduction written for the speaker to give. So, not being one to look a gift horse in the mouth, I'm going to tell you what he said about himself. Bill Miles grew up on that part of Long Island where kids didn't go around riding horses in their spare time. After graduating from Vassar College, where he didn't ride horses either, he joined the Peace Corps, serving for 2 years as an English teacher in West Africa. It's there that his equestrian life began. After the Peace Corps, Bill moved to the Boston area, earning both master's and doctoral degrees from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. However, this made him neither a lawyer nor a diplomat. His dissertation about politics in Martinique, Paradox in Paradise, was published in 1986, 2 years after joining the political science department at Northeastern. So we can work out how long you've been here, Bill. We were just saying you remember Northeastern's library way before this fine building was erected. Okay. Thanks to 4.5 Fulbrights, or 9 half-brights, which he'll explain in his talk, and several other grants, Professor Miles has also lived in and published books about West Africa, South India, the Middle East, and the South Pacific. And you've spoken about some of these things here. He also lived for a year on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, where he was thrown by a horse and fractured a shoulder bone. My African Horse Problem, to which Bill's 10-year-old son Samuel also contributed, is his 9th book. Although published by a university press, the University of Massachusetts, it is not intended for a scholarly audience. So we are excused taking notes, I think that means. Bill, it's all yours.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody who's come out this evening. I also want to extend appreciation to Harvard Law School and Yale Law School and the law schools of Berkeley, Columbia, and Georgetown. In their infinite wisdom, all of them collaborated at the end of my senior year of college to reject me. They enabled me, therefore, to resist parental pressure to become a lawyer. And by rejecting me, they allowed me to do what I really wanted to do, which was to join the Peace Corps. Moral of the story: rejection can be liberation. I have to confess that even as a senior in college, I knew so little about Africa that when the Peace Corps recruiter called me up a Friday afternoon and said, "We have a position for you," and asked if I was interested in going to this country, I thought to myself, how dumb can these people in Washington be? Don't they know that Niger is the capital of Nigeria? Which shows you how little I knew as a senior in college as I was about to set off for 2 years in Africa, because it is a completely different country. In fact, it's not even pronounced Niger, but Niger, having been a French colony, not colonized by the British, as was Nigeria. It is completely landlocked, unlike this is Nigeria, which does have an outlet to the coast. Niger has no oil. Nigeria is awash with petroleum. Completely different country. I also have to say that during that weekend, or on the Friday afternoon, the Peace Corps recruiter also said, well, we do have a place for you in Zaire, as it was called. Today it's called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But then they said, well, you have the weekend to think about it. And that weekend they had a civil war. So knowing that I still had to achieve permission from my parents, and particularly my mother, I figured it was best to take Niger rather than war-torn Zaire. Speaking of my mother, to say that I have an overprotective Jewish mom would be an understatement. You know, we all now are living in the wake of 9/11, but in 1977, there was a lot of terrorism of another kind. There was a lot of airplane hijacking, Palestinian directed at Israel, also at Jews in the diaspora. So it wasn't easy getting permission from this lady. But eventually she came around under 3 conditions. And with your permission, I will read from the book. When you're over there, my mother intoned, do not say these 3 things. Remember, I'm going as a Peace Corps volunteer. Do not say you are an American. Niger, by the way, is a former French colony, Muslim country, completely part of sub-Saharan black Africa. And I'm going as a Peace Corps volunteer. My mother says, okay, yes, mother. And do not, she continued, reveal that you are Jewish. Yes, mother. And lastly, my mother implored, never tell them that you are white. While we're on the subject of influential women in my life, with your permission, because you did introduce me as an author that you're meeting, not a professor. So I would like to slip out of my role of professor, if I may. And as I do so, introduce the better Professor Miles from the World Language Center, who will probably Right. Okay, so the point is, going into the Peace Corps was a very liberating experience. And having undergone that experience, I could do anything. I could even be a university professor. So the second moral of the story is Peace Corps is liberating, especially for kids from Long Island whose greatest experience with horses was watching cowboy and Indian movies. And then finding themselves as a professor of English in a middle school in the Sahel, which was a pretty well-endowed area at the time, endowed with sand, as you can see. And I was a lot more endowed with what my cap is fortunately hiding, or its lack thereof. Remember the classroom, okay? Remember what it looks like. Here are some of the students that I was teaching as a professeur d'anglais right out of college. Try to teach them all parts of American culture. This lady was the secretary of the school. Here's the principal. And something that sometimes I wish we had more often in the United States, a disciplinarian. Don't let the pink gown called a boo-boo mislead you. Here is the staff of the school, with one exception. This lady was a Peace Corps volunteer who came after I had been there a year. This gentleman is my father, who came to visit, and people would remember for years and years, a white man with white hair. They hadn't seen that since colonial times. This impressive-looking gentleman, whom I wish you to remember as well, was the chief of the area where my school was located. Again, it was a well-endowed area. It even had a hotel. Okay, not Howard Johnson's, but it had a medical facility. Okay, not Boston General, but it had that. And it even had a bank. Now, it's true that it was closed for the entire 2 years that I was there. And nevertheless, with the $200 a month living allowance that I was able to get from the Peace Corps, I was able to fulfill a dream. Here it is. Iska means wind. And after 1 month being in my Peace Corps town, I was the proud owner of Iska, who actually had to have, at the time, had his hair shorn more shorter than I did. It was nice bringing in the barber for the horse. It was nice bringing in experts for a pedicure. And it was really nice in a context which did become, on account of some racial insensitivity, and I'll explain in a moment, liberating to get out of the confines of the town. Let me explain. A white man in this part of Africa was an anomaly. And in a sense, a freak show, entertainment. There was absolutely nothing injurious about it. But after 6 months of people saying, "Hey, white man, how you doing?" in the local language. Or going to market and saying, "Hey, there's the Anasara." It's the same word. White man means Christian. Didn't matter that I wasn't. Still call. "Hey, European." You know, I have a name. I have a name. So it would be very liberating getting on my horse and just getting out in the bush. And if I may read from the book a passage to explain how the horse kept my sanity under those conditions, and you can either watch or close your eyes as you imagine me saddling up on my horse, or imagine you saddling up on your horse and you trot out of town. On horseback, nobody expects you to halt for all the customary greetings. You can just wave and go. Even the kids tire of running after you once you canter outside the town limits. Then, following a sandy track into the empty bush, you break into a gallop. You are thrilled by the combination of speed and rolling rhythm, by the thump-tic-tac-thump on the soft Sahelian sand, by the slight danger of a stumble or a fall, by the sheer magnificence of racing alone on your own horse out in this vast African savanna. You're alone. You are free. You take your horse back down to a canter and then down to a brisk walk. Over his heavy breathing, you can now hear the occasional or the of cattle, or the of sheep and goats. Sometimes the hot wind carries the sound of distant women pounding millet in huge mortars with their wooden pestles. The sun begins to turn orange on the horizon, and a hoot, hoot, hoot joins the improvised score of the bush. You follow the sound. An exotic bird with a long, curved, bright red bill. It swoops into a baobab tree, pretending to rest for the night. You are alone. You're free. And when you finally return to town, in a final gallop on the home stretch, triumphantly answering the calls of, "How's the horse? How was the galloping?" with, "See him here. We galloped in health." Your soul has been restored, your cultural claustrophobia assuaged, and your love for living in Africa totally reinvigorated. Iska was not my only companion. Bobo was with me for 2 years. And it was very, very hard at the end of my stint with the Peace Corps, having to say goodbye to Bobo and having to sell Iska. Iska, yes. I have to keep my horses straight. So I wanted to go back. But how? What pretext would bring me back to the area where I had been a Peace Corps volunteer, not far from the border between Niger and Nigeria? Well, all good tax-paying Americans did, thanks to a Fulbright grant and an idea that said, you know, I'd lived 2 years here, and I never got across the border. What's life like on the other side? Why not do a study of how this artificial colonial boundary made by the French and the British at the turn of the 19th century, how has it separated what has it done to a people who speak the same language, Hausa, practice the same religion, Islam, same culture, same history, but are citizens of completely different countries? And rather than do it in a town where there's modernization through roads, I want to do it in little villages that weren't linked. And so I chose upon these 2 villages on each side of the boundary without a road. Yes, it would be a step down from the place with a hotel and a bank and everything. Right in the bush. This was the one in Niger. And how would I get across the border? Horseback. A chief in a village is not a chief in a town. I showed you the town, chief, remember? Humble chief in the village area. A good man, but much more modest in prosperity. Remember the middle school where I taught? Primary school in the village. Much more low-tech, as you could say. So, how did I get across the villages? Let me introduce you to trouble. Wahala, as his name literally means trouble. And part of the reason for his name, you may note, was that he had a very healthy appetite, a healthy sexual appetite for a horse, and he kept running away, looking for romantic interludes. Sometimes he would do that leaving me in the bush after I thought I had tied him up very securely, and then had a rendezvous, unbeknownst to me, and I would have to rely on the kindness of strangers to track him down. His reputation was such that sometimes I was approached to stud, for money, of course. But he was such trouble, this Wahala, that under pressure, he couldn't do it. But my mission, remember, the reason that I was there on a Fulbright was to do comparisons about identity in the village. And one of the things I did was to do surveys of people on each of the villages, asking them, well, what's more important to you? What makes you tick? Are you Muslim? Are you African? Are you Nigerian? Are you Nigerian? And then at the end of my study there of a whole year, the embassy of the United States said, well, you're a Fulbright. We will allow you to use our diplomatic pouch to send your research materials home. Now, I don't know what you have in mind, what image when I say diplomatic pouch. This is what I had in mind, and that this man would fight to the death. Well, the only thing that died, really, were my boxes of research materials that were destroyed en route, and my surveys didn't make it. A whole year of work lost. It was sad. It was as sad as having to sell Wahala, my horse. So not only am I out a second horse, I'm out a year of research. So what do you do under these circumstances? Write to your senator. I wrote to my senator. I wrote to Senator Kennedy, since I'm a constituent of Massachusetts. And I explained the story, and he reactivated my Fulbright. And that's what makes it kind of a half-right, because I never know how to count that one. I was able to go do the materials again, buy another horse, this one called Luck, Sa'a, sweet horse. Didn't run away. None of those troubling things that Wahala used to do. And I said, this is it. I am not going to sell my horse again. I'm getting too attached to these wonderful animals. So, on as official stationery as Northeastern provided at that time, I made up an agreement with the chief of the village, whose signature is there. And anyone want to read this for me? Okay, so basically I said, here's the deal, Chief. I'm leaving my horse in your care. You don't have a horse. You could use one. Take care of it, ride it, please feed it. When I come back, I'll have my horse. And in the meantime, you will have access to transportation as well. And don't worry, if there's an act of Allah, should the horse become sick, should it die, I absolve you. It isn't what we call in legal terminology an act of God. He signed, I went off, and an unforeseen development occurred. Something that I could not have imagined when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Something I couldn't imagine with a PhD. I'd have a son. And taking care of a son, before you know it, another 8 years pass, and I haven't gone back to see my horse. Sammy grows up learning, knowing that he's got one, the family horse in Africa. He believed that one too. And then we got this letter. Problem. Anyone want to guess? The chief died. I had not foreseen the possibility, remember, I didn't go to law school, that the chief might predecease the horse. And now the heirs were disputing. Whose horse is this? It's ours. No, it isn't. It's that crazy white guy from America, remember? No, I don't remember. He borrowed the chief's horse. No, it was his horse. It was the chief who wound up. The letter says, there have been fights in the village. Some people say this, some people say that. There have been physical altercations. Please advise. And I said, aha, no problem. I've got that document from Northeastern. I'll send it. That should settle the problem. To send a letter, to get a response, 6 weeks each direction. Then I get a letter back saying, we just received your document with the proof that the horse belongs to you. Unfortunately, 2 days before, one of the heirs to the chief seized the horse, brought it to market, has sold it. Please advise. Well, at that point, I realized that sending letters and old documents, even with Northeastern stationery, wasn't going to do it. I had to cut or run. Or actually, I had to cut or go. So I decided that it was time to return with the true heir to the horse, my son. Because they might dismiss me for whatever reasons, but they know that there's another little me for whom this horse is meaningful. So, would I go? Would I take young Sam, 10 years old? I just want to give you 27 reasons why I shouldn't. Will, you could read this one.
Sure.
Please, for those who can't see in the back.
Not sure what. Oh, it's amoebiasis, brucellosis, cholera, dengue fever. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Right the way through to trypanosomiasis.
Right. 27 diseases to which I was certified, having been exposed, as all of us Peace Corps volunteers had been. And yet, this lady, this Professor Miles, gave permission for me to bring young Sam, take him out of 5th grade. He'd missed school. And his 5th grade teacher said, okay, Sam, but keep a journal. That's how I'll let you miss some school. So there is young Sam, whose journal entries justify his name on the book, who writes, for a long time I had known I was going with Dad to Africa on an adventure and a mission. I felt very excited, nervous, and privileged. That I was going to Africa because of the horse was pretty interesting in itself. Traveling halfway around the world just so I could see and ride my horse. I felt like some millionaire who had just bought a whole nursery daycare center for my 2-week-old baby. It gave me the feeling that I could do anything I wanted, anywhere, anytime. Well, it was an adventure. He enjoyed sort of the camping out aspects of life, making tea and putting in cube after cube of sugar. The primitive aspects of life, the bathroom facilities, he enjoyed less. He did enjoy being a hit, and he did enjoy getting around with some of the other kinds of horsepower that he found quite cool. But as I was making my own inquiries about the horse, I realized that things were a lot more complicated than I've explained to you, because I didn't know at the time that the real problem was a political one. The horse was a sidebar to a dispute over the succession to the chieftaincy. A dispute between the brother of the late chief and the son of the late chief. Both wanted to be the new chief. That's why the horse became a problem, because, as I was learning, he who had lost the fight for the chieftaincy felt that at least he should get a horse out of it. But I didn't know any of that. And I was talking to people and making all sorts of faux pas under the circumstances. This was the new chief, who actually supported my claim to the horse, but was in a delicate situation himself, because how much could he afford to win? The chieftaincy and depriving his uncle of the horse? If any of you study Middle Eastern politics, you remember that when the king of Jordan, King Hussein, died, and there was a big dispute whether it would be his older brother or his son who would take over. Similar type of thing. I thought I had gotten it figured out. I had a powwow with the new chief and with his uncle. And he said, "No problem, I understand. I see your son. I will make amends." And then I receive, in the middle of the night, this letter. In the same language, but not in a script that I could read. You have brought, and this is the name that I go by there, you have brought Mr. Bello to the village. You, the host with whom I am staying, are the son of a jackass. All that remains for you now is to bring forth the angel of death. I had immunized my son against as many of those 27 diseases that you saw on that Peace Corps document. I had taken every precaution I could think of, but I hadn't the slightest antidote against black magic. And that was what was being invoked in this letter, in this curse. And I think I'll stop here and take questions.
how did your son react to the news that he wouldn't be getting this horse?
Well, at what point in the story? At what point in the story? You mean before we went, when I got the letter, or?
Maybe I'm making an assumption. At the where we're left off in the story, you and he are there, and
We received this threat,
yes,
this curse. That's when the story really takes off. That's not the end of the story. What I wanted to do is set the stage and set the context. This was just showing you how the problems of the horse developed. And I don't want to tell the whole story. I kept him, actually, I protected him as a father would do. I protected him from the elements. I protected him from diseases and harm that I could anticipate. And to the extent possible, I protected him from bad news. As long as I could. And so I certainly didn't tell him that we received this threat, this curse. The new chief was the son, which was another problem because you have, in a culture that respects age and the elderly, the fact that it was a younger person who won and that can happen. In succession in this part of Africa, it's got to be a relative and a male blood relative of the deceased chief, but the lineage can go this way, it can go this way, it could go that way. And the choice was made by the community. And so you have an election for a chief, and some losers can be sore losers.
How did it affect the bureaucracy of the town, and did it later on affect the story? Are you going to get into that?
Well, that's how the horse became part of the political story in the first place. Because there was a lot at stake. There was the power, the prestige of being a chief. There was also the prestige and the prosperity, the wealth of having a horse. I mean, a horse is a big deal there. So it affected social relations. It kind of split the village. And this is what upset me so much when I was getting these letters and saying that, indirectly, they weren't blaming me, but I felt responsible for the fact that there was this intensified dispute in the village and that people were being harmed and threatened and roughed up. And particularly the people who were protecting my interests were the ones who were being roughed up the most by sticking up in the name of honor and truth for the true owner of the horse and taking quite a risk. That's one of the reasons why I felt that I needed to go back and not just leave this problem to fester and pretend that it wasn't important, because it was important.
The threat that was made in that letter was primarily against your host rather than you, or was it against both? It was a threat directly against my host, but indirectly against me. I mean, invoking the angel of death,
that was going to cover the whole household, including the guests within it. And that's when I really felt that my problem was a lot more intense than I had bargained for. That really upped the ante. And that really infuriated me. And it frightened me a little bit. And I didn't know how far. See, that was the moment. Really, it was at that moment that I decided I was going to go completely back into the persona that I had developed over the previous, since I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and then the 10, 15 years I had been going back. That I was part of that community to the extent that they called me back to settle this problem. And if they felt that I belonged there, then I needed to go all the way. I couldn't just turn around, go home, and say, all right, it's your problem. I'll just take care of my son back in Massachusetts. I was being cursed because I was bringing these problems, that this dispute, that I was taking away the horse that some people thought belonged to them. Look, the man had just lost his brother. He thought he was going to take his place. He wasn't a very wealthy chief, so there wasn't a lot of the inheritance, but there was that horse. And then here I go back and I said, no, you can't do that. That wasn't the chief's horse in the first place. So afterwards, and after I came back and after I wrote the book, I began to better understand his position. But at the time when I received the curse, I just went into fallback position and I decided to use all of the means at my disposal, which basically meant using my contacts. Not through the bureaucracy, but through the chiefly bureaucracy, because there are lots of levels of chiefs.
This is changing gears a little bit. Can you
Please.
tell us more about the clothing that you're wearing?
Sure. Actually, I'm glad you asked. This is an amalgam of different parts of West Africa. The cap is from the Yoruba along the coast, more Nigeria than Niger itself. The shirt is generic West African or coastal African, I would say. And the trousers, which I most recently got, these are of the Tuareg people, who are a nomadic camel riding one. I mean, if a Tuareg read my book, he said, why get so upset about a horse? It's that small little thing. They're really into the camels. They live in the desert itself, and they're quite a fierce people. They are known for being warriors. I just wear their pants.
You got that first letter that said the horse was causing all this problem. Why didn't you just give it to one of them if it was causing that much problem?
Give away my son, my children's inheritance? That was one of the things. When it was just me, and then when it was just my wife and me, I could do these. Maybe I could have done that. But at this point, I had children, and I'm thinking of, and I raised them talking about the horse. I mean, since they were very young. This is kind of part of family folklore. I mean, some people talk about having a house in the Hamptons or on the Cape. We didn't have that, but we had a horse in Africa. And I felt that I didn't just want to give it away, because how could I explain that to the kids?
You can say people are getting hurt over it. I mean, like, I understand, but it's just like if it was me and something I know was causing people harm, if it's not like of
Yeah. Okay. But who would I give it to?
pick one, you're like, or just say,
Split the money between.
two guys.
Well, I could have done that, but there was somebody and some buddies who had already staked a position and stuck their neck out, saying that the horse belonged to me and that they had been fighting in my interest, and it would have been a betrayal of them to just get rid of it, because they felt that they were right too.
I was just curious, what did invoking the angel of death mean? What was the black magic supposed to be?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting part of Africa that became Muslim fairly recently. Like this area 150 years ago was what some people call animistic or pagan, polytheistic, invoking spirits, real black magic, sorcery, which Islam is supposed to have gotten rid of. Islam is not supposed to admit all of those things. So the notion of the angel of death is an expression that would be used within the context of Islam, but would actually resonate with the pre-Islamic magical practices, black magic, in which you could invoke these kinds of curses, hurt people from afar. The kind of magic that in another part of Africa was called Vodun, and then in this part of the this part of the Atlantic became voodoo. So it was his way, using Muslim language, of saying, I'm going to use some of our ancestral weaponry So it was kind of like, you could think of it as, sticking pins in dolls, but not in as crass a way and not in such crass language, because they're Muslim.
You say you purchased the horse when you went to Africa on round one. Was it is this like monetary, or did you get the horse through other means? And how much do horses cost anyway?
Okay, good. This part of Africa, and most of Africa, is monetary. So you go to a market, like you go to a mall. There you go to market and you bargain. You bargain for everything. And I discussed the issue. I anticipate the issue of how much does this horse cost, and I'll just tell you the way, rather than fumbling in the book for the actual passage. My host was challenged on the question of, why have I come? And he said, I didn't come just for the money, because for the amount of cowrie shells, the literal word for money is these little shells, because before you had paper money, they used the shells from the seashore, string them up, kind of like wampum in American Indian. transactions. For the amount of cowrie shells Mr. Bello killed to buy an airplane ticket to come here, he could have bought 10 horses. So you do the math. Right. Right. So I'm a totally self-horse-made man with instruments and techniques that would appall you. I don't think that you would ever consider sticking these on your boots, these stirrups, and sticking these pointy, now rusting pieces of metal into the side of the horse to make him go. Or to really use, and this was the whip for, I guess this was Wahala. He actually needed it sometimes. But to really make him go. Anyone who want to guess what this contraption is? It's a ceremonial halter. On Muslim holidays, so that even the horses feel good, they would deck them out and put this over the snout and make them just look and feel good. So I learned the techniques in that part of Africa, and I learned the lingo, and I learned all the language and the techniques and the instruments, and that's why I feel embarrassed writing in America, because I know it's not the same way, and it was just basically learning on my own.
I was wondering who it was that sold the horse, who brought you back, and how many people live in the village or in the area that's affected by the chief, whoever the chief is of this village.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understood let me answer the easy part that I understood. So the population of the village, which I've been studying for 20 years, and this is classic demography, in high population countries, the population doubled in the time that I told the story, basically. In the 40 minutes, the population doubled. Of course, I told you 20 years in half an hour. So that went from about 3,500 to 7,000 people.
The old chief's brother or his son who became the chief, which one was it who, you said one of them sold the horse right where you got there?
Right.
Which one sold it and
Yeah.
which one brought you back?
The one who sold it was the loser. He and his lineage. I don't know if he personally sold it, but the people close to him. They're the one who snatched the horse and then sold it. But there's another question.
Yeah. Who was it that was writing to you that asked you?
Oh, who was writing to me? Right. So my host. So my host was a priest, Muslim priest, a friend from way back when, who in a previous book that I wrote, I have this nice chapter about the time he spent in prison. He was sent to prison for the offense of preaching without a license. This is a country in which you need permission to be a certified preacher, Muslim. And he preached without it, and he was sent to jail. There's a great description of what life is like in an African jail when you're there for that kind of a crime. Anyway, he always saw himself above everything. He saw himself as the wise one looking for justice. He never told me what to do. He just explained the situation and always left it up to me. So I'm sorry I didn't prepare a picture of him, but I still get letters from him. It's very rare for people in that village to be able to write in what we think of as English letters, but actually Roman characters, because most of them write in Arabic, not Arabic. They don't know Arabic very well. They know their local language and writing it in Arabic script. To then learn to write their African language in Roman script is another level. You have to learn another alphabet. And he had learned that other alphabet without ever having learned the European language that is taught. So that is pretty extraordinary. That he was using what they would consider to be French letters. I mean, for us it's the same, English, French, Roman, but he didn't know French. And the reason I showed that letter before of showing the that's the Arabic script of the African language. This is what I wanted to show. That outside of the villages, the national government, the only official language of this country is French. And it is very bureaucratic, and it is very official. And this is the stamp of think of it, the governor of the République du Niger, who's certifying that this person, the new chief, was duly elected to replace the deceased one. But nobody can read it in the village. And I have a whole section about how I got this letter. How I got a photocopy of this letter. Because I couldn't take the original document making somebody a chief. You know, you need a photocopy, you just go down the hall and you drop a dime. To get this photocopy, I had to send somebody across the border into Nigeria to go to a town where the electricity had broken down. He had to spend a night in a hotel, wait till there was a place that had a generator functioning. He had to eat, you know. Now, these were legitimate expenses. You know, what this photocopy cost me. Never complain when Snell Library increases the cost of making a Xerox copy.
What language did you use to communicate with him?
I used the language that I learned as a Peace Corps volunteer, and many people are surprised when I say this and don't believe me, but it's true. This language, Hausa, is the most widely spoken African language. It is a myth that Swahili is the most widely spoken African language. There are more speakers of Hausa than there are of any African language.
My question is, what right did the brother have to the horse, and was he punished in any way for selling the horse?
Well, he thought he had inheritance rights as the older brother. He thought that he had first dibs on the household and the household items. And he would have if the horse actually belonged to the chief, but of the late chief. But it was my horse.
How does the inheritance law in that culture, does inheritance pass from father to son or father to brother?
Well, but it's complicated, and I can't cite a verse which would tell you exactly how it gets divvied up. Usually, it's very, I mean, that's something I should look at when it's not my own property, because then I'd be a little more objective that way. But according to Muslim law, daughters, this I know, can only inherit 1/4 of the property, or no, 1/2 of the property of male heirs. So I don't know what provisions would have been made. Usually there's some kind of agreement, and if there's not agreement, then they go to, like we would go, some sort of dispute resolution mechanism, which they tried to do over my horse, but the brother,
that immediately right after the close of the question and answer session. So right after we close, please feel free to talk to Professor Miles and buy his book out front.
but I just want I'm not selling the book. It's the bookstore which sells the book, and I tell the story.
And one final question. Okay.
Well, thank you for not asking what happened to the horse in the end. Thank you for not asking.
Thank you so much, Professor Miles.